January 28, 1975. Teaneck, New Jersey, 6:47 a.m. The attic is silent. Too silent for a house under siege. 73 federal agents are tearing apart the mansion below, sledgehammers crashing through drywall, crowbars ripping open floorboards. They're hunting for the empire of Frank Lucas, the invisible king who broke every rule of the underworld and lived to tell about it. Until today, Frank stands in his silk pajamas, hands cuffed behind his back, watching through a crack in the ceiling as agents destroy everything he built. 5 years of perfect silence. 5 years of moving. 1.6 million monthly through Harlem without a single arrest. 5 years of being a ghost in a world of loud men who die fast. The lead agent, Detective Richie Roberts, climbs the stairs. He knows the math doesn't add up. Frank Lucas was moving 50 kilos of 98% pure heroin monthly at $32,000 per kilo wholesale. That's not revenue. That's profit. For 4 straight years. The money has to be somewhere. Roberts opens the attic door and finds Frank sitting in a leather chair like a king on a throne. Behind him, stacked floor to ceiling in military duffel bags, is cash, mountains of it. 10s and 20s and 50s wrapped in rubber bands, organized with the precision of a Swiss bank. Roberts and his team spend 6 hours counting every bill. Their official report logs the seizure at exactly $584,683. But Frank Lucas kept records, real records, written in his own hand in a leather ledger that would surface decades later during a civil lawsuit. According to that ledger, there wasn't $584,000 in that attic. There was $11 million. Do the math. 11 million minus 584,683 equals 10,415,317 missing. $10.4 million that vanished between the counting and the evidence locker. Where did it go? Into the system that claimed to destroy Frank Lucas? Into the pockets of the very men sworn to uphold justice? Or was it the price Frank paid to keep breathing in a world where dead men tell no tales? This isn't just the story of America's most powerful drug lord. This is the story of the biggest heist in federal law enforcement history, committed by the people wearing badges. Because here's what the legends never tell you: Frank Lucas didn't just get arrested that morning. He got robbed by cops, who then charged him with the very crimes they were committing. The silent man survives. The loud man dies. But what happens when the silent man discovers the system is louder and dirtier than any gangster? Harlem, 1968. This isn't a neighborhood. It's a plantation with different overseers. Walk down 125th Street on any Tuesday afternoon, and you'll see the illusion of black power. Numbers runners working corners, policy banks behind barbershops, hustlers in sharp suits talking loud about territory. But follow the money upstream, and every dollar flows to Pleasant Avenue, to Mulberry Street, to the Italians. The Genovese, Gambino, and Lucchese families don't live in Harlem, but they own the air everyone breathes. They are the landlords. Everyone else just pays rent. In this world of flash and noise, the most dangerous man is the one nobody notices. Frank Lucas. Not a boss, not a player, just a shadow. For months, he's been Bumpy Johnson's driver, a quiet nobody from North Carolina with country manners and city hunger. While other street soldiers fight to make names for themselves, Frank makes himself invisible. He learns that the man holding the door hears the secrets. The man driving the car sees the map. The education begins in the back seat of a Lincoln Continental, rain tapping the windshield like Morse code. Bumpy Johnson, 62 and dying slow from heart disease, talks while Frank listens. Not about guns or territory. About mathematics. About systems. About the difference between making money and building power. You see those cars on the corner? Bumpy asks, nodding toward the Italian Cadillacs parked like sentries, They don't belong here, but they own everything you see. Frank studies the street through the rearview mirror. What's that make us? Tenants, Bumpy says, lighting a cigar with hands that shake slightly. We pay rent in blood. They raise it when they get bored. The lessons come in fragments, delivered in smoky backrooms and during midnight drives through the city. Bumpy breaks down the economics of their enslavement with the patience of a professor teaching quantum physics. The Italians control the heroin supply. They buy it cheap from Marseille and Turkey, cut it from 40% purity down to 10%, then sell it to black dealers at a 300% markup. Those dealers compete against each other for scraps while the Italians collect. It's colonialism with a street address. 3 rules, Frank, Bumpy says one night, spreading ledgers across a card table. Stay quiet. Stay near the money. Never sit at a table you're not ready to flip. Frank memorizes them like scripture. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. Real power isn't shouting on corners. It's controlling supply, and supply comes from places most Harlem hustlers can't even pronounce. July 7, 1968. Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. Bumpy Johnson collapses during breakfast, his heart finally surrendering to decades of stress and cigarettes. Frank catches him before he hits the floor. In the ambulance, sirens screaming, Bumpy grabs Frank's collar and pulls him close. The Italians aren't your partners, he whispers, each word a bullet. They're your landlords. And every landlord can be replaced. 3 hours later, the king of Harlem is dead. The streets expect chaos. They've seen this movie. When a boss dies, lieutenants fight over territory, soldiers pick sides, bodies drop. The Italians smile in their social clubs, expecting the inevitable civil war that will weaken the black crews so they can sweep up the pieces. Control through chaos, profit through division. But Frank Lucas doesn't fight. He doesn't attend the funeral. He doesn't make a play for Bumpy's corners. While other dealers draw lines and make threats, Frank does something nobody expects. He disappears. The whispers start immediately. Frank's dead. Frank's scared. Frank ran back to North Carolina. The Italians laugh. Problem solved itself. But Frank isn't running. In a cramped apartment under a single dim bulb, he's spreading maps of Southeast Asia across a card table, studying the Golden Triangle, calculating shipping routes from Bangkok to Newark, reading about opium production in places the mob has never heard of. Frank Lucas isn't fighting for a corner in Harlem. He's planning to make the entire American mafia irrelevant. 3 months after Bumpy's death, he boards a plane to Thailand carrying $40,000 in cash and a plan that will either make him the richest black man in America or get him killed in a jungle 6,000 miles from home. The invisible man is about to become a king. Bangkok hits Frank Lucas like a fist made of heat and diesel fumes. September 1968. The air tastes like fish sauce, incense, and war. GIs in jungle fatigue stumble out of bars, their eyes hollow from things they've seen in the mud. Prostitutes lean in doorways, speaking broken English to men who might be dead next week. Black market dealers whisper offers in 6 languages. This isn't Harlem. This is the crossroads of empire, where American money meets Asian death, and everyone pretends they're clean. Frank steps off the Pan Am flight in a cheap safari suit, carrying a duffel bag with $40,000 cash and a plan that borders on suicide. A black man from North Carolina walking into the heart of the Golden Triangle with no backup, no connections, no protection. Just Bumpy's lessons echoing in his head. Stay quiet. Stay near the money. Never sit at a table you're not ready to flip. The Golden Triangle isn't a metaphor. It's a real place where 3 countries bleed into each other. Laos, Thailand, Burma, and opium fields roll like green oceans under a sun that never stops burning. This is feudal time. Regional warlords control territories larger than some American states. They have private armies. They answer to no government except the one written in bullets and blood. Frank spends 3 weeks grinding through contacts, paying bribes, following leads that twist through back alleys and jungle villages. Everyone thinks he's crazy. An American asking about heroin sources during a war? Either CIA or dead man walking. But Frank keeps moving, listening more than talking. Paying in cash never promises. The meeting happens in a bamboo compound deep in the Thai mountains, surrounded by men carrying AK-47s like accessories. The man Frank came to see sits in a wicker chair under a ceiling fan that barely moves the thick air. History calls him different names. Some say 007. Some say other things. What matters is this: he controls the purest heroin pipeline in Southeast Asia. The warlord looks at Frank and laughs, amused by this small black American in his jungle talking about business like he's somebody. Frank doesn't flinch. He sits down uninvited and puts numbers on the table. Real numbers that will change everything. $4,200 per kilo, Frank says, his voice steady as stone. You move it to me at that price, I move it in New York for $50,000. That's an 1,100% profit margin. I want hundreds of kilos. Cash on delivery. No Italians. No French. No middlemen. Just you and me. The warlord stops laughing. Frank just described a business model that eliminates everyone currently making money off this product. The Marseille connection. The Turkish suppliers. The mob distribution networks. All of it irrelevant if Frank can move product directly from Southeast Asia to Harlem. You can pay? The warlord asks, studying this strange American who talks like a king. Frank opens his briefcase. Neat stacks of hundreds stare back like green promises. This is the deposit. I'll be back in 6 weeks with the rest. The deal is struck with a handshake that will flood American streets with death. But there's one problem Frank hasn't solved. Logistics. How do you move hundreds of kilos of heroin from Thailand to New York without the mob, CIA, or customs catching you? The answer becomes the darkest legend in American crime. The cadaver connection. Whether fully true or embellished mythology, the story spreads like wildfire. Frank allegedly uses military coffins returning from Vietnam to transport heroin bricks. America bringing its sons home in flag-draped boxes lined with poison for Harlem. The ultimate desecration. The ultimate invisibility. Frank returns to New York with blue magic, 98% pure heroin stamped with his mark. The Italians sell brown junk cut to 10% purity. When Frank floods Harlem with product twice as pure at half the price, he doesn't compete. He nukes the entire market structure. By 1971, Frank generates $1.6 million monthly. He's untouchable, invisible, disciplined, but on March 8th at Madison Square Garden, Frank Lucas wears a $50,000 chinchilla coat and sits ringside. The invisible man just made himself visible. Madison Square Garden, March 8, 1971. 20,000 people packed into concrete and steel to witness two gods destroy each other. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. The fight of the century. The air tastes like cigar smoke, sweat, and history in the making. Celebrities, politicians, mobsters, millionaires, everyone who matters in America has paid blood money for these seats. Frank Sinatra shoots photos for Life magazine. Diana Ross glitters in the crowd. The vice president sits in his box like American royalty. But tonight, There's a new king in the building. Frank Lucas steps through the garden entrance, and the world stops to stare. Floor-length chinchilla coat that ripples like liquid silver under the arena lights. Matching hat tilted with the precision of a crown. $50,000 of dead animal and ego wrapped around a man who swore he'd never be seen. His wife Julie walks beside him in mink and diamonds, looking like African royalty visiting the colonies. For 5 years, Frank has been a rumor, not a face. A whisper in back rooms, a shadow in cars, the invisible hand moving millions through Harlem without leaving fingerprints. His power came from being nobody. Tonight he declares war against obscurity. Tonight the ghost wants to be flesh. They don't sit in corporate boxes. They don't hide in the back. Frank Lucas walks to the front row, center stage, better seats than the Vice President of the United States. For a man who built a $50 million empire on Bumpy's sacred rule of invisibility, this is suicide dressed as success. Up in Section 347, Row M, Seat 12, Detective Richie Roberts adjusts his cheap binoculars. Roberts is the anomaly, the honest cop in a department of thieves, the man who found $1 million in unmarked bills and turned it in instead of splitting it for lunch money. His fellow officers spit when they say his name. They don't trust a cop who won't take a taste. Roberts doesn't watch the fight. He watches the crowd. That's where the real criminals sit, displaying their stolen wealth like peacocks. And then he sees it. A black man in a chinchilla coat worth more than Roberts makes in 3 years, sitting ringside like he owns Madison Square Garden. No Italian sponsor beside him. No obvious mob connection. Just this unknown figure dripping money in a world where every dollar has a pedigree. Roberts lowers his binoculars and asks the question that will burn down an empire. Who the hell is that? Not Ali. Not Frazier. That guy in the coat. The investigation starts small. A name. Frank Lucas. No arrests. No obvious income source, just a mansion in Teaneck, New Jersey, registered to a man who supposedly works in real estate. Roberts pulls organized crime files, surveillance photos, informant reports. Frank Lucas is a ghost in the system. But ghosts don't wear $50,000 coats to prize fights. Within weeks, a federal task force forms around that single question. DIA, FBI, EARS, NIPD agencies that normally fight over jurisdiction suddenly cooperating because someone high up smells blood. They can't catch Frank on drugs yet. His organization is a fortress built on family loyalty and country silence. The country boys from North Carolina who value blood over money, quiet over flash. So they change tactics. If they can't catch the spider, they'll map the web. Surveillance vans park down the street from Frank's Teaneck mansion. Long lens cameras snap photos of license plates, faces, meeting times. Wiretaps go up on public payphones in Harlem. They track the money flow, the car movements, the lifestyle that doesn't match any legitimate income. The pressure builds like water rising in a sealed room. Frank feels the temperature change. Trusted lieutenants get picked up on minor charges, questioned for hours, released without explanation. The paranoia sets in like cancer. Phone calls that click too often. Cars parked too long on his street. Strangers asking too many questions in his spots. The binary opposition of Frank's life begins tearing him apart. His empire demands absolute silence, but his success screams for recognition. His discipline built the throne, but his pride wants to sit on it in public. Julie begs him to run. We have money in Switzerland, we can disappear. His brothers suggest going underground. Let it cool down. Lay low for 6 months. But Frank Lucas doesn't run. Kings don't abdicate their thrones. Instead, he makes a calculated decision that will define his legacy. If the storm is coming, He'll weather it with proof of his power stacked above his head. He liquidates everything liquid: street cash, stash house reserves, emergency funds hidden in safety deposit boxes across 3 states. $11 million in small bills moves, brick by brick, bag by bag, into one location: the attic of his Teaneck mansion. Rubber-banded bundles organized by denomination, military duffel bags lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. Not just money, respect made tangible. To Frank, that attic represents more than cash. It's insurance against poverty, leverage against the system, proof that a nobody from North Carolina became somebody the world couldn't ignore. If they come for him, he can bargain. If he needs to rebuild from ashes, those 11 million are the seeds of resurrection. January 27, 1975. Teaneck sleeps under winter's skin. Frank walks through his suburban palace, past the attic door that guards his empire's heart. His children dream in their beds. Julie moves through the kitchen like any suburban wife. The television hums with late-night programming. The fortress feels impenetrable. Frank goes to sleep in silk pajamas surrounded by millions, confident that his preparation makes him untouchable. He believes his discipline, even cracked by pride, is enough armor for what's coming. He believes the 11 million upstairs means he'll never be poor, never be powerless, never be anybody's tenant again. At dawn, 73 federal agents will prove that in America the House always wins, and sometimes the House steals everything you thought you owned. January 28, 1975. 6:47 a.m. The first sound isn't the battering ram, it's the dogs. They feel it before the humans do: a low growl in the hallway, claws clicking on polished wood, ears pinned back toward the driveway, where unmarked sedans stack like a funeral procession. Then the house explodes. The front door bursts inward under steel and rage. 73 federal agents pour through the breach in Navy windbreakers, guns drawn, voices overlapping in violent chorus. This isn't Harlem. This is Teaneck. Quiet, rich, white suburbia where raids don't happen. Not like this. Not with armed men bleeding through the walls like the house itself is hemorrhaging law enforcement. Frank's children scream from their bedrooms. Julie clutches her silk nightgown, thrown against imported wallpaper by men holding shotguns. The suburban dream becomes a crime scene in seconds: paintings ripped down, sofa cushions slashed, drawers emptied onto hardwood floors that cost more than most annual salaries. Frank Lucas stands in the hallway in silk pajamas, hands raised before they demand it. He doesn't run, doesn't scramble. The king of Harlem doesn't crawl on his own carpet. Cold metal bites his wrists. A knee digs into his back like the weight of the entire system finally collecting its debt. Face pressed against tile, he watches his fortress get systematically destroyed by men who make in a year what he spends on cars. Detective Richie Roberts moves through the chaos with surgical focus. While other agents celebrate the arrest, Roberts follows the mathematics. Frank Lucas moved 50 kilos monthly of 98% pure heroin at $32,000 per kilo wholesale. That's $1.6 million in profit every 30 days. For 4 straight years. The cash has to be somewhere because men like Frank don't trust banks and they don't trust partners. Roberts climbs toward the attic. No secret panels, no elaborate security, just a padlock that yields to bolt cutters in 3 seconds. He opens the door and finds the heart of the empire. It's not just money, it's architecture. Military duffel bags stacked floor to ceiling like sandbags defending a position. Bundles of 10s, 20s, 50s, wrapped in rubber bands, organized with Swiss bank precision. The physical weight of $11 million in small bills pressing down on the attic floor, on the ceiling beams, on the entire house like another story built from paper and power. The counting begins. Roberts and his team work in shifts because the tedium of counting millions makes men sloppy. They photograph each bundle, document each bag, create chain of custody paperwork. But something shifts in the room. Voices drop. Side conversations start that nobody records. Some bags go out the front door to official vehicles. Others veer toward the garage. Some never make it to evidence vans at all. Downstairs, handcuffed to a radiator, Frank watches what he can see. The angle is bad, but he counts. 3rd bag, 9th, 15th. He knows weight. He knows volume. The bags leaving his house don't match the empire stored above his head. They're not seizing his money. They're stealing it. 6 hours later, Robert slides paperwork across a metal interrogation table, the official seizure report. Frank stares at the number typed at the bottom, 584,683. He knows every bill in that attic, counted 3 times in the past month, $11 million exactly. The math screams impossibility. 11 million minus 584,683 equals 10,415,317 missing. $10.4 million vanished between the attic and the evidence locker. Where's the rest? Frank asks, his voice barely a whisper. That's what we found, Frank, Robert says, but even the Boy Scout looks uncomfortable. This breaks something fundamental in Frank's worldview. He built his empire believing in codes, street codes, prison codes, unwritten rules that even corrupt cops followed. You get arrested, you do your time, you keep your mouth shut, and your money waits for you. The system was dirty but predictable. But this is pure theft under the color of law. The people wearing badges just committed the biggest heist in federal history, and they're charging Frank with the very crimes they're committing. Frank sits in his federal holding cell, staring at the seizure report through steel bars. He faces 70 years in prison. The Italians want him dead. Corrupt cops want him silent. But they made one mistake. They left him alive. And they underestimated his memory. Frank knows who was in that attic. He knows which agents carried the bags. He knows the system is just another gang. Bigger, dirtier, smarter than any crew he ever ran. He looks at the guard and speaks words that will terrify the Nifty more than any gun. Paper. Pen. The king of Harlem is ready to burn down his own kingdom. But this time, he's taking the whole system with him. The holding cell is 6 feet by 9 feet. But the choice Frank Lucas faces is infinite. Option A. Stay silent, serve 70 years, die in prison with his honor intact, while the men who stole his money retire to Florida on his dime. Option B. Talk, become a rat, get killed in the yard before his first appeal. Frank Lucas didn't build a $50 million empire by following other people's rules. He chooses option C, strategic warfare. Frank stares at the seizure report until the numbers blur into accusation. 584,683. The lie printed on official letterhead, stamped with federal authority, signed by men who just robbed him of over $10 million and expect him to stay silent about it. In the street code, there are only 2 options: die with honor or live as a rat. But Frank chooses a third option. He decides to rat on the system itself. The proffer session happens in a windowless room that smells like stale coffee and broken dreams. Federal prosecutors lay out the numbers like a death sentence, 70 years minimum, conspiracy charges that stack like dominoes, RICO statutes that could bury 3 generations of his family. They want his drug network, his suppliers, his distribution channels. They want him to destroy everyone he built his empire with. Frank leans back in his chair and smiles for the first time since the raid. "I'll cooperate," he says, "but not against my organization." The prosecutors exchange confused glances. "What else is there?" "I want to talk about cops," Frank continues, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. "Dirty cops. The ones who just stole $10 million from my attic and wrote down 500,000. The room temperature drops 20 degrees. This isn't what they expected. Street dealers don't usually flip on law enforcement. They flip on each other. But Frank Lucas isn't playing by street rules anymore. Frank doesn't just name names. He provides dates, times, badge numbers, bank accounts. He exposes the Special Investigations Unit, an elite NIP task force that was supposed to fight drugs, but was actually running the most sophisticated protection racket in American law enforcement history. These weren't cops taking small bribes to look the other way. They were partners in the drug trade itself. Frank details how Sioux detectives escorted his heroin shipments from Kennedy Airport through the city, how they warned him about federal raids 48 hours in advance, how they took monthly payments in brown paper bags at diners on Queens Boulevard, how they didn't just protect his operation, they helped run it. The supposed elite task force created to destroy the drug trade had instead become its board of directors. His testimony becomes a nuclear bomb dropped on New York law enforcement. The mathematics of destruction are staggering: 75 convictions. 52 of them are cops, detectives in handcuffs, their faces on the evening news, their pensions evaporating, their families learning that daddy wasn't a hero. The entire Sioux gets dismantled like a criminal organization, because that's exactly what it was. Frank's cooperation destroys more police careers in 6 months than internal affairs destroyed in 20 years. The King of Harlem proves that the system itself was just another gang, bigger, dirtier, and more protected than any crew he ever ran. But here's the twist that saves Frank's life: he never publicly mentions the missing $10.4 million. When investigators ask directly about the attic discrepancy, Frank goes silent. His lawyer changes the subject. The line of questioning dies in paperwork. Why? Because there's a universe of difference between exposing corrupt street cops and accusing federal agents of grand theft. Naming dirty NIP detectives makes you a rat. But accusing federal agents of stealing millions makes you a dead man. Frank knows which battles he can win and which ones end with a prison shank or a car accident on a lonely road. The missing money represents more than theft. It's proof that the system is dirtier than any gangster. But Frank makes the ugliest calculation of his life. He can chase justice, or he can stay alive. He can't do both. So he lets the money go. $10.4 million becomes the price of breathing. The deal is cut. Instead of 70 years, Frank serves 7. He walks out of prison in 1981, technically a free man. But freedom has a taste, and it's bitter as medicine. The aftermath is devastating in ways prison time can't measure. Frank pays a price higher than any sentence: total exile from the world he once ruled. The King of Harlem becomes a man without a country. The streets that once whispered his name in reverence now spit it like a curse. Rat. Snitch. The man who broke the code. The country boys are scattered. The territory is fractured. The respect is dead because the streets don't care about nuance. They just know he talked. He survives on the margins, doing interviews, consulting on movies about his own legend, living off the mythology, while the $10.4 million that could have rebuilt his empire remains hidden in someone else's offshore accounts. The federal agents who stole it retire with government pensions. The evidence logs get accidentally destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1989, a convenient combustion that erases the paper trail of the theft. Fast forward to 2007. Frank Lucas, 77 years old, sits across from a journalist and finally tells the truth about the missing millions. By then, it doesn't matter. The statute of limitations has long expired. The agents involved are retired, dead, or untouchable. The paperwork is ash. Justice becomes a theoretical concept discussed in law schools, not something that happens to federal agents. "I had $11 million in that house," Frank says, his voice carrying 3 decades of silence. "They took it all, and they wrote down 500,000. You do the math. The journalist asks if he's angry. Frank laughs, a dry sound like leaves scraping pavement. "I lost the money, but I kept my life. In my world, that's a win." Frank Lucas built a $50 million empire selling death to his own people. He flooded Harlem with heroin that destroyed families, created addicts, turned neighborhoods into war zones. He made himself rich by making his community poor. By any conventional definition, he was a monster. Yet the $10.4 million that vanished from his attic was stolen by the very people sworn to protect society from men like him. Federal agents who took an oath to uphold justice committed the biggest theft of Frank's criminal career. They robbed him, charged him with crimes they were committing, then hid behind badges and bureaucracy when the math didn't add up. Frank Lucas died in 2019 at 88 years old. The missing millions were never recovered. No federal agent was ever charged. The official record still shows 584,683 seized from the Teaneck mansion on January 28, 1975. So here's the question that defines Frank Lucas's legacy and America's relationship with justice. Who was the real criminal? The man who poisoned the streets and admitted it, or the system that robbed him, lied about it, and called it law enforcement? The gangster broke the law. The law broke itself. And in the end, the only difference between the King of Harlem and the men who took his crown was a badge and the power to write the official report. The house always wins, but sometimes the house cheats. And when it does, who's left to call it out? The only witness was a drug dealer whose word means nothing in a courtroom. The perfect crime, committed by the people who write the laws. Frank Lucas was a monster, but the system that destroyed him was something worse. A monster wearing a badge, stealing millions, and sleeping soundly because nobody with power cared enough to ask where the money went. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. But the system? The system never even gets investigated.